Here's an uncomfortable story. I was visiting my grandparents with my family when I was in fourth, maybe fifth grade, something like that, in Torrington, Wyoming. And I remember one day my cousin and I and the grandparents and maybe an aunt and uncle and mom and dad crammed into this big old boat of a luxury car, like a Buick or something. We're all wedged in there together, and we go over to Scottsbluff, Nebraska. It's maybe like a 40-minute drive. I don't know. And on the way there, we're having this jovial conversation. And at this point in my life, I was trying to feel out things socially. Where do I fit? What do you say? How do you get a laugh, etc.? And it overwhelmingly went wrong when I tried, but I mean, this is what you do when you're a kid. And so I think my mom had been watching, I'm not sure what show it would be. I remember the characters. There's a character named Patch, and his girlfriend was Kayla. It was like General Hospital or Days of Our Lives or All My Children, one of these long-running soap operas. And Dad was always like, there's stuff in there that's going to rub off on the kids. I don't know if that's a good idea. Mom would watch it sometimes anyway. And I remember something did rub off on me. Some character called some other character a derogatory term for a woman of the night. I had no idea what that word meant. All I know is that it really got a reaction out of the room on the TV set, and I just stored it away in my little bank of words to try out sometime soon. No idea what it means. No idea. So we're driving along in this Buick with everybody crammed in there, and there's this little lull in the conversation. It's quiet. It's like, ooh, this is my big moment on the stage. I'm going to try this thing out right now. And so I just turned to my cousin, who's maybe like 12 or 13, and I'm like, Melanie, you dirty And the car got super quiet, and she just looks at me like, oh, you are going to get it. You're such an idiot. And sure enough, I got it. I was very firmly corrected. Though nobody ever really explained to me why I wasn't supposed to say it, just that it was mean and I wasn't supposed to say it. And so for years after that, there was just this word that I had heard was bad that I used once and I got in trouble for, but I couldn't tell you what it means. And so as weird as this is going to sound, that little formative moment proved to profoundly inform how my wife and I have decided to handle the whole kids learning about words and figuring out how to wield them aspect, if you will, of our parenting. So we got a strategy. I'm not saying it's the right strategy. I mean, come on, anybody who's a parent, we're trying, we want to do our best. We want things to turn out well for our kids, but secretly we're all just winging it. So this is our version of winging it. I just decided I don't want my kids to feel like that. If there's a word that we feel is too sharp an instrument for them to wield properly at this point in their lives, I want them to know what it means. And so we got this policy, we're walking along in the park and somebody yells something or says something. It's a word I don't think they know, but I don't want them to pick up. We just huddle up right there. I'm like, all right, kids, did you hear that lady over there scream? And they all look kind of nervous because they know how this works. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, cool. Who knows what means? And usually they'll throw out a theory or two. I'm like, nope. Okay, here's what it actually means. It's pretty much the harshest word we have in our language for poop. And it's one of those words that is just too sharp an instrument for you guys to use. So I just don't want you to use it yet. And later, when you're older, you can decide when and if it makes sense for you to use that word when it's up to you. Whether that's a good idea or not remains to be seen, but you can see what we're going for there. We're just trying to take the power away from the word and have our kids do and not do things with eyes wide open because they actually know the effects and meaning of what they do and don't do. But here's the point with all of this. One, I just think it's a fun story and I want to tell you. Two, sometimes people might be ready for the information for themselves, but not ready to understand the implications of the information, and it wouldn't really be fair to them or to others to just send them out into the great wide world armed with this information and be like, yeah, just run with that. Just say stuff about it, talk about it, whatever. It should be absolutely fine. Whether it's a word or a concept or something that is still taking shape or percolating in a family, in a business, in a relationship, sometimes you just don't want that person, even though they might know what's going on, to be the person rolling that out because it's going to make a mess and it's going to get weird. And likewise, in this one verse that we are quickly looking at today in Matthew 16:20, I think that is the parental style, managerial style, decision-making matrix that Jesus is using when he gets done with this whole exchange with Peter, where Peter rightly identifies Jesus as the Christ, and Jesus says, yep, you got that right, and blessed are you. And then at the end, Matthew tags on this little thing. It says, then he warned his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. Now, this has happened before in the book of Matthew, and every time we look at it and it feels like, all right, well, it's just not quite time yet. But every time that it does, it feels like there's a little different reason for this. Here, though, it feels like it's crystal clear. You've got 12 guys who, one anecdote earlier, hear Jesus say, be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And they're like, he's mad because we did not pack lunches for this boat trip that we're on. That was so dumb. We have to remember to pack lunches, guys. And then Jesus is like, no, what? No, not about the lunches. I mean, it's a metaphor. You guys have heard of metaphors, right? It's a metaphor for like their bad teachings. Like, watch out for that, because a little yeast works through the whole dough. Is this nothing? None of this is ringing a bell? Okay, well, it's not because you didn't bring sandwiches, dudes. The point is, these guys just figured this thing out, and this bit of knowledge and information that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, is a very sharp instrument. And these guys are very clumsy, green, untrained wielders of such an instrument. And if Jesus turned them loose with this information, they would make a mess. Now, all the way back in chapter 10, you'll recall that Jesus did not send them out with the message, the Christ has arrived and he is Jesus of Nazareth. No, he sent them out with a repetition of John's message, the kingdom of heaven is near. And that was it, full stop. I mean, the narrative makes it clear that the disciples are moving in the right direction, but they've gone from being like everybody toward Jesus, cold as ice, to being hot and cold, up and down, in and out, to getting to a place where, okay, now they're hot-blooded and they are seeing what Jesus is about, and they're like, all right, we get who you are. You are the Christ, the Messiah. But that is still not encompassing of the whole sophistication of the position of Jesus' messiahship at all. And as we're going to see as we move forward in Matthew, they're still thinking military leader. They're still thinking, well, he would need to be alive in order to win. You couldn't have him lose in order to win or die in order to win. So Peter's willing to hack off people's ears in order to solve the problem and defend Jesus to the very, very end. And they're begging for a reckoning. Let's burn down this city. Even after Jesus is raised from the dead and about to ascend into heaven in the book of Acts, they're like, all right, so we've waited a long time. Will now be the reckoning with Israel. Now are you going to sort everything out? We're going to point out to everybody that they were wrong and we were right, and you really are the king. When are we doing the reckoning? He's like, no, it's not really for you to know the appointed time. Like, it's for you to be my witnesses. And then he sends them out on the trajectory of the book of Acts and indeed all of the age of the church, which is the age in which we still exist. So the disciples, even right up until the moment before Jesus' ascension, they still are thinking in terms of some type of zealot-minded leader who is going to come and get rid of the oppressor, who is Rome. Maybe bring about some correction to the religious trajectory of Israel, maybe displace the religious leadership of Israel. But they still, even after Jesus said, I'm going to go and die, and I'm not here to be served, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many, even after he spells all of that out and then does it, they are still conceiving of what he means by the Christ, the Messiah, in the wrong way. So what happens if you send these kids out with that sharp instrument? That's not a little detail. It's a threat to all the power structures. Just the notion of it was a threat enough to Herod a few chapters back here to have him massacre a bunch of babies. This thing that Peter just confessed, I mean, this is pearls. And if you hand it off to these green disciples who still don't get it to roll this information out on your behalf, if you're Jesus, effectively you are casting your pearls before swine because they're not going to get it right yet. They're nowhere close to understanding the implications of it yet. And so I don't think it's that Jesus didn't want people to figure out that he was the Messiah yet. I think it is that the notion of Messiah was just too sharp an instrument to wield properly at this point. They're going to cut themselves. They're going to cut others. They're going to make a gigantic mess. And like I was saying, if you've been looking at Matthew at all, you don't need my help or reminder to know that this is not the first time that Jesus has told somebody to keep things under wraps. In Matthew 8:4, right after the Sermon on the Mount, he comes off the mountain. There's a guy with leprosy there. The guy's like, hey, Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus is like, yep. And he reaches out and touches him. He says, I am willing. And immediately the leprosy goes away. Then Jesus said to him, see that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest. And clearly what Jesus is intoning here is that the miracle speaks for itself. Then in verse 30 of chapter 9, and remember the blind guys are like, hey, have mercy on us, son of David. And Jesus is like, let's just go in this house. And they come inside and he's like, hey, do you believe I'm able to do this? And they say, yes, Lord. He's like, okie dokie. And he touches their eyes. According to your faith, it'll be done for you. Their sight is restored. Then he says, see that no one knows about this. And they go and spread the word all over the place, and everybody gets Jesus fever anyway. Then in chapter 12 and verse 16, I didn't write it down. Nope, 15. Aware of this, Jesus withdrew from that place. Many followed him, and he healed all their sick, warning them not to tell who he was. So my point is this: in the same way that all parents have to figure out what words to send their kids out into the great wide world with because they're ready to use some of them and not ready to use others, likewise, Jesus seems to be doing the same thing, not just in Matthew 16, but in several places throughout the book of Matthew, but especially in Matthew 16, because he just got rightly identified as the Christ and the Messiah. And dude, that was dangerous. So he's protecting the disciples. He's protecting what still needs to be accomplished to buy himself time, to do what needs to be done, to get to the cross. And really, Jesus' strategy seems to be that he never actually has to spell this out himself. It should be just so dang obvious. Like, the truth of what this is should be crystal clear, and it should come into focus. And if somebody doesn't see it, the implication I'm getting from Jesus so far is that God opens eyes and shuts eyes. And what do we make of that? Well, once again, that's a bit challenging, isn't it? I want to keep this Africa renewal thing in front of you. This is an important project that we play an important part in. There are kids in Uganda where Africa Renewal works who are lined up and in need of sponsorship to help with education, healthcare, food. $40 a month makes a gigantic difference in that. And they are straight up asking me to ask you to consider sponsoring a kid or more than a kid for $40 a month. africarenewal.org/TMBH is how you go and check that out. All right, thanks for hanging out with me. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.